Bento, a great way to package both food and websites. Today we're going to build one that looks like this using React, TailwindCSS, and Framer. All of the code is available on my website, along with a bunch of other cool animated UI components for React. I'm working on finishing up a couple of templates as well, which will be available to anyone who's grabbed a copy of Pro. Prices will go up when these roll out though, so if you've been thinking about grabbing a copy, now probably is not the worst time. Anyways, let's write some code. So jumping right into it, I've already got my project set up with TailwindCSS set up, and I'm actually using TypeScript for this. I didn't mention it. There's only one little thing that I really need it for, and it's more to explain how something is going to work as opposed to something you need. So no need to really follow along with the TypeScript piece. I've also already added Framer and two other packages, one called Tailwind Merge. So I'll just import that really quick so you can see what it looks like. Tailwind Merge, this is the package, as well as a package called React Icons. So just this right here. If you want to follow along exactly, you can use those same packages as well. We'll see why I'm using those in just a second. So before we actually get to creating the nicer parts of the website, I just want to do a really quick primer on how Grid works. So CSS Grid, because everything is really just going to be built on top of a normal grid. So inside of my div, which has some basic stylings already, just min height screen, background zinc 900, padding x4, padding y12, and then text zinc 50. I'm going to create one more div inside of here, and this is going to have a number of styles. So I'll just add class name. I need a margin on the x-axis of auto. I need a max width of 4xl, and then just so we can see this, let's just add some padding. So we'll say p4, and then just do like BG white. And now we should see that we have our block up here. Now I don't actually want to have these last two styles, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those, and I'm going to replace those with a display of grid. Grid is going to allow us to actually chop everything up into columns and rows. Specifically for this, I just want to chop this up into rows, or into columns rather. And in order to have as much granularity in how we define these columns as I want, I'm going to use 12 columns. So to do that, I'll say grid calls 12. And if we hover over that, we're going to see that we get 12 equally spaced columns. So 12 min max between 0 and 1 fraction. And we're not actually going to see anything just yet, but if I come inside of my div right here and add a couple of extra divs, and I'm just going to give these some random background color. So I'll say BG, whatever, red 300, and then give them a little bit of padding so we can see them. P4, and then we add a couple of those. We now have 4 divs, and it looks like we just have this little line right here, right? We can actually see these separated though by adding some gap. So I'll add a gap of 4, and now we'll see that we have 4 items. So if I went through and I added 12, so 4, 8, 12, this now takes up the full size of the entire width of our wrapping container because it has 12 columns. Now with Grid, with each of these individually, I can actually define a different size for each of these. So I'm actually going to just select all of them, and by default, I'm going to say column span, say 4. So column span 4 is going to take up 4 of the 12 available columns for each of these. Thus, each of these boxes are going to take up 1/3 of the width of their container. I think you should be able to see where I'm going with this to actually create our bento grid. So I could then come up to this one and say maybe grid columns 8. And now our first item, let's make that a different color so we can see it. Say blue. Now our first item takes up 2/3 of the entire width. Of course, these might not be exact, so maybe I can make this, say, 7. Now we're gonna have a little bit of extra space over here on the side. I'm gonna go ahead and undo that piece, and I'm gonna come down to my second one, and we'll say that takes up maybe 6. And what we're actually gonna see happens is everything kind of rolls down to the next row, right? Because the first item is taking up 8, the second item, let's make that, say green, and this second item is taking up 6, but really we have enough space over here at the top for one of these to kind of shuffle in up top right here. And if that is the behavior that we actually want for this, I could come up here and I could say grid flow dense. This is going to densely pack all of our elements wherever they may be able to fit. So in this case, it's just taken one of these extra items and moved it up into this empty slot. Now maybe for this second one, which we've made 6, we'll actually make that 8. Maybe we'll move it down 1 level, and we can just continue to play around with this. Maybe this one takes up full 12, that yellow so we can see it. And you can just kind of keep adjusting these until you get a grid layout that you actually like. And that's really the basis of how a bento grid works. So you're gonna have a display grid on a wrapping container, and then for each of their elements inside of it, you can actually define how many of those columns it's going to span within the grid. You can also span a number of rows. So maybe let's say for this one, we could say row span 2. And now we'll see that this element, let me make that another color as well, say orange. And now we'll see that our orange element right here is 2 columns high, or 2 rows high rather. So this can kind of just get arbitrarily complex for whatever your needs are. Now, what I would like to do is instead of having all of these individual divs and then trying to style all of them using, some similar styles and some different styles, I would like to actually make a component, and that component will be the building block for each one of the elements within our grid. So I'm going to go ahead and actually remove all of these divs, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a new component, and I'm going to call that block. For right now, the block can just return a div, and we can give that similar styling to what we had before, just so we can kind of see these showing up. I'm going to give this a call span of 4. I'm going to give it rounded LG. We'll give it a border, and that border should be zinc 700. Give it a background of zinc 800, and I'll give it P or padding of 6. Now we can come up to the top here and add a couple of these in. So let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we should see that we have 6 of our blocks up here at the top that we can then resize however we want. Now, obviously we need to be able to pass in some kind of content to these blocks. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. So mainly we're going to need the children prop right here. And I'm going to define the props separately. I'll give this a type of props and set that equal to, it needs children. And children would be a React node. And for now, we'll just make that optional so we can kind of see how this is going to work. I'll then come up to my top block right here, and we'll now be able to actually pass in any block information that we want, or any kind of interior information that we want. So I could just, add a p tag with some random text in it. And of course, we actually have to render that. So back down in my block, I'll close off this div and make sure we're actually passing in our children like this. And now we can see that we have our text rendering. Now we could kind of continue down this path, but I want to be able to change a couple of different things here. In a minute, these are all going to be animated. So I want to be able to pass in any of the animation related props to this div. And I also want to be able to pass in different class names that will merge with these class names. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently than kind of what I'm leaning towards right here. First things first, I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to import a component called motion from Framer Motion. Motion lets us take any of our normal JSX elements and turn them into motion dot whatever. So in this case, motion.div. And this is going to give us access to different kind of animation props. So I could say, I want this to animate to a scale of, 1.2 or something. We'll get more onto that in just a second. But the actual props that this div takes are going to be based on this prop type. So if we come back up to our Framer Motion right here, we can see that we can import motion props like this. And what we can actually do is just extend off of that. If you're actually using TypeScript, of course, you can follow along here. And we don't actually need our children prop here anymore because that's going to be implicit with this motion props. But what I do want to kind of say here is that I want to make class name optional. Class name is a string. And instead of directly passing in children like this, I'm just going to remove this and have this be self-closing like this. We'll destructure class name as well as whatever other random things are passed in. So any other props that you happen to pass in that intersect with motion props will come in right here. And I can actually just spread all of these in, and this will continue to work the same, right? So we'll see that I'm still able to render my children up here in this block. For this class name, since we're using Tailwind, we actually want to be able to merge any of the classes that are passed in with whatever the base classes are here. So for instance, for one of the blocks, we might want to change the call span to, call span 6. And in order to actually be able to support that, we're going to need one of those packages that I talked about earlier. That package is called Tailwind Merge. Specifically, we need this function called TW-merge, which we import from Tailwind Merge. And all that does is we can actually take our class name and then say Tailwind merge. The first argument to this is going to be that initial string of our base classes. And we want to merge that with whatever class names are passed in. And with this, what I'll now be able to do is come up to one of my blocks and say class name is equal to, say, call span, 6 or something. And that should correctly override right here. Now that we've got the basics set up, I think we can start making some blocks that, actually look good on the page. In order to start doing that, I'm going to remove everything that I have from this first block right here. We can keep a couple of blocks in here just to kind of visualize the spacing. But now I'm going to copy this and I'm going to come down under my block and I'm going to create a component for my first kind of grid in this bento grid. I'm going to call the first one header block. Header block is going to just return one of our blocks, and we can start adding some styles for this. So on small screens, I'm going to want this to take up all of the full columns. So it should take all 12 columns. So we can say call span 12. I also want it to take up 2 rows. So we'll say row span 2. And whenever we're on medium screens, I want it to take up only half of the width. So we'll say call span 6. Now, if we drop this in up here in place of this block, You should see what this looks like. And I missed AP, so actually, wait, there we go. Nice, there we go. So it takes up half of the width on this side, and then we'll see that it takes up more width whenever it gets smaller. In just a minute, we're gonna fill up all this extra space, so don't worry about this gap over here on the right. Let's just start by just styling up this first block. I'm gonna just drop this first piece in. So first I want some kind of image just for like, my hero image or like my, kind of icon, my profile picture here. I'm using these free images called Dice Bear. They're really cool. I'll drop a link in the description. You can go in and check out all the different kinds of styles that they have for these, but really they just give you kind of placeholder avatars that you can use for all kinds of stuff. For mine, I'm just giving it a width and a height of 56 pixels right here, rounded full to make it a circle, and then a little bit of margin on the bottom. And that is going to look something like this. Below this, I'm going to add the heading of my section, so just using an H1, giving this a margin bottom as well. I'm giving it a text size of 4XL, font medium, and leading tight. So this is going to give us a line height of 1.25. This is just going to give us a little bit more breathing room in our text. We'll see what that looks like here in a second. But now inside of my H1, the default color of all of this is set up here for like the text. So text zinc 50 looks like this. So essentially what we're saying is I want this text right here to be that lighter color, and then the less important text that comes after that, I'm kind of darkening that up a little bit, and that is going to look something like this. Finally, I just want to add a empty link to contact me. Of course, you can hook this up if you want. For my instance, it's just kind of a layout piece on the page. This is just using an A tag. I am in Next.js. Feel free to use, a link if you want, but just leaving this as an A tag for anybody who's not using Next.js, just giving it an empty href, a display of flex item center, because I have some text here, and I'm also importing an arrow icon from the package I mentioned earlier. I'm then giving it a little bit of gap between those elements, a text of red 300, and then whenever I hover over this, underline. So just like that, and now we have our first block. And really continuing on, it's just more iterations of this exact same process and deciding how you want everything to kind of chunk into this grid. So for my next block, for instance, I want to add links to my social pages. I'm just going to call that socials block. And this can actually return a fragment because there's going to be 4 separate blocks in here. Just starting with 1, we'll add 1 single block. We're going to add some class names here. On smaller screens, this is going to have a call span of 6, a background of red 500, and on medium screens, a call span of 3. Then inside of this block, I'm just going to add a link, and this link is just meant to be like a YouTube link, just giving it a display of grid with the full, place everything in the middle, text of 3XL, text of white, and then I'm using this YouTube icon, which I'm getting from that same package. If we want to just see what one of these looks like, we can come up here to the top and add this in. And now we'll see that we have our first icon here. And I'm just going to copy paste this down 3 more times for 3 more items. I'll change these to whatever I want them to be. So for this one, I want this to be GitHub. So I'm going to use SI GitHub here. Now we have our GitHub link. The next one is going to be to TikTok. And the final one is going to be to Twitter. So let's see what that looks like. Nice. So now we have our 4 social links up here at the right. If we want to see this on smaller screens, it's going to collapse down like this. Now, one extra thing that I want to add just for these social blocks is some kind of little hover interaction here. And the cool thing about this is that our blocks already support passing in framer motion props, right? Because we did this off of motion props, and those are all just being spread in. So we don't need to do anything fancy. We can just directly pass in our definitions for our animation into each of these individual blocks. So let's just start with the top one. I'll add a couple of spaces here. And what I want to do is whenever I hover this, I want it to rotate and scale a little bit. So the way that I can do that is with a while hover prop. And this is all from Framer Motion, by the way. This is just passing in these motion values. This is available to us because we're using Framer Motion. And all that I need to do for this animation is I can say, for my example, we'll just say rotate. Whenever I hover it, I want to rotate it, say 2.5 degrees. And I want to scale it up to 110%. We can see what that looks like. So if I hover over this first one, it's now animating and rotating up, and I can just do the same interaction on the other 3. So I'll just copy paste this down. And for these middle 2, let's just have them go minus 2.5 degrees. So maybe for these 2, we'll do something like this. And now we should see that all 4 of these, whenever hovered, are going to give us a little animation. So it looks really nice. Continuing on, we can really just keep going down this list and thinking of different things that we might want to put in different versions of these little blocks going down our grid. I'm going to go pretty quick through these last couple, and I'm going to urge you to go ahead and maybe even come up with your own versions of different things that could go in these different blocks. Another example from my original example is something like an about text block that looks something like this. For smaller screens, again, this is going to take up the full width of all of the columns. And it's actually going to do the same for larger screens as well. This is just going to take the full width. And this is really just some text saying, hey, here's a little bit about me. We can come up and render this under our socials block. That's going to look something like this. Another example might be something like sharing where you live. This is something like a portfolio template or something. So I'll create a new block called location block. On smaller screens, it's going to take up the full width, but then on larger screens, it will only take up 3 columns. And that is going to look something like this. So just a little pin with where I live. And finally, I'm going to add one more block for, say I had an email list or for someone to contact me. Maybe that could look something like this. So again, on smaller screens, it'll take up the full width. I want this to render next to my location. So I'm going to give this a call span of 9 whenever we're on larger screens, seeing as 9 plus 3. Where is it? 3 columns right here. On medium-sized screens, that gives me 12. So each of these should fit nicely next to each other. And inside of this, I just have a paragraph tag and then a little form with an input and a button that, isn't really hooked up to anything right now. We can come up and drop this in and see what that looks like. And I'm going to remove these final 2 blocks. And now we have our basic little grid here. So this is fully responsive. Larger screens looks like this. Smaller screens, it should all collapse down to look something like this. Now I do have this one nice little animation here, but I think we can add a couple of extra little things just to give us a little bit more sauce here. So one thing that I have seen before that I think was cool is to have each of these little grid items kind of stagger animate in. By that I mean maybe this first item scales in and then the second one, third one, fourth, fifth, and it goes all the way down. So you get this kind of wave effect whenever you first load the page. We can start setting up something like that by going to our block component. This block component, again, wraps all of our individual other components. So animating this one block is going to animate everything. And let's just do a basic version of this. So let's just come in and say our initial state. So this is kind of before the page loads. We'll say our initial state is something like this. So scale of 50%, a Y of 50 pixels, like a Y translated 50 pixels, as well as an opacity of 0. And then maybe whenever the page mounts, I want to actually animate this. So we'll say animate to something like this. Scale of 1, Y of 0, opacity of 1. We will now see that whenever I reload the page here, we get an animation looking like this. There we go. Nice. Yep. So that's a good start. But I do actually want to stagger all of these elements. And in order to do that, I actually can't define all of my state like this. And instead, I need to define these as variants, and then the parent element, so this div right here, needs to actually control animating them. So to do that, I'm going to take all of this information that I have here. I'm going to create a new prop right here called variants like this. That's just going to be an object. And then you can have different named keys that you can pass in other places. So we can say something like initial, and that can be our state for initial right here. And then you could reference it like this, just as a string. And instead of animate like this, I could have another key in here called animate and pass that in there, and then change this to a string. And we'll see that that still works exactly the same. So if I reload the page, it'll all still work. Yep, there we go. But like I said, I actually don't want this to control the animation. So I'm going to remove these 2 strings right here, or these 2 props, leaving just my variants here. What I actually want to control this animation is this parent div right here that's wrapping all of my blocks. So what I need to do is on my div right here, I'll say motion.div instead of just a div. And I'm just going to copy paste those initial and animate props in here. Now, essentially what this is saying is the initial state of the parent is initial, the child is animate, and that's going to control all of these blocks down here. So that's going to map to these styles right here. We could name these, by the way, whatever we want. So if I wanted to call this banana or something, that would totally work so long as there's actually a state in my variants right here. That's called banana. So if I reload this page now, this should still work just like that. But banana sounds kind of stupid. I'm just going to stick with initial. Now, in order to stagger these, given that our parent element is now controlling the actual state of our child elements, all that I have to do is add one more prop called transition. And inside of transition, we have a stagger children prop, and then you can define the time between each child's animation. So for mine, let's try 0.05 seconds. And once we now reload the page, we should see these all stagger in. Yeah, nice. You can also come down to your blocks and tweak around with the different easings and things if you wanted to. So I could add a transition prop down here, and maybe I want an ease of ease in out instead of the normal spring easing. Maybe the duration could be something like 0.5 seconds. You can see how that looks. Cool, that looks okay. I actually do kind of like the spring easing in this case. And I played around with it a little bit myself and came up with some settings that look like this. I would probably need a longer video to really go over what all of the different values here do. Honestly, I haven't gone super deep in it myself, but I did find that these exact spring settings look really, really nice, at least in my opinion. So if we refresh this right here, now our animation will look like that. Now this is also going to affect our hover animations. So we'll see that our hover animations are a little slower, but I think that looks really nice. And I think the last thing we need to make this look really nice and just kind of polish it off is just an extra couple of little touches, like a little logo at the top and things like that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drop those in. Maybe I want a logo. I just grabbed this as a temporary logo from logoipsum.com. I'll drop a link to that down in the description. Just gave it a fill color that actually matches my website. Maybe we'll drop that up here before our emotion div. That looks like that now, looks a little more professional. And then finally, maybe we just want like a little footer link or something. So down at the very end, drop in my footer, just saying made by me, and drop that in up here in our wrapper component as well. And now we have our finished product. So everything reload, we'll animate in staggered hover animations, and all of this is mobile responsive. So if you go back to a small screen, it should all nicely arrange itself. Again, all of the code and links and everything are in my description. If you got anything out of this, I would massively appreciate a like and a subscribe, as well as a comment down below on what other types of videos you like to see, if this is actually useful for you. If this is your first time here, I make a whole bunch of videos on different cool animations and interactions and stuff. So if you're interested in that, I put out new videos, once or twice a week. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, I would, I'll be here. Anyways, I will see you guys next time. Peace.